Friends, good morning. Just one quick word about this gospel, then I want to say something about the first reading we have from Paul's letter to the Romans. So, can you hear the sense in which in the parable, Jesus is describing this man who's very much in a sort of echo chamber, where he's only talking to himself. So I will say to myself, what shall I do? This is what I shall do. What's happening here is the direct opposite of prayer. Is really what's going on. Right? Prayer is dialogue with another. It's entrusting oneself to the word of another, opening oneself up to the promptings, stirrings, movements of another, which is where the first reading comes in. This beautiful, beautiful section from Paul's letter to the Romans. We hear Paul pointing back to Abraham, who in Eucharistic Prayer 1, the Roman canon, the church refers to Abraham as our father in faith. Our father in faith. And Paul's talking about this act of faith by which Abraham entrusted himself to the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. I want to talk about that. I want to say a word about that word, righteousness. In Greek, the word is dikaiosune. Dikaiosune. And perhaps a better translation for dikaiosune, instead of righteousness, would be rectification. God's rectification, God's act of rectifying things, putting things back together to fix the thing, to make it whole again. So what Paul is saying is that Abraham's mighty act of trust was utterly ingredient in God's work of rectification, reconstituting his beloved creation, putting it back together through his human instruments, his human agents, his image bearers. So what was it that Abraham did? Recall, right, how God calls Abraham in his old age to step out of his tent. Look up to the heavens, Abraham. Count the stars if you can. Remember, it was daytime when he did this. Look up into the heavens, count the stars if you can. So will your descendants be. And he leans out on this word. For decades, he's leaning out on this promise, trusting himself to this promise. He's not in the echo chamber of his own self-imagining, the echo chamber of his own self-conversation. He has entrusted his life to another. And then when the heir of the promise shows up, Isaac, take your son Isaac, your only begotten, to a mountain I shall point out to you, and there offer him in holocaust to me. And he goes, and he has the knife in hand, and he's ready to strike, and the angel stops him. Look, the whole point here is that he opened wide his heart and his life in this radical entrustment to the word being spoken into his life. And that very act of trust, that very act of surrender, it's the opposite movement of our first parents in the beginning, right? Adam and Eve, in this great act of fear and mistrust, closed themselves off. So the work of rectification, righteousness, putting the thing back together, it had to have at its beginning one of these sons of Adam opening himself up in trust and surrender. It's the beginning of the undoing, if you will, or it's the beginning of the putting it back together. Abraham's act becomes prototypical of the kind of response that God is looking for from us. This openness, this trust, this surrender, this acquiescence. Abraham's fiat lays the foundation for the great fiat. And without his, we wouldn't have hers. Amen.